Can I tell you something that I think building wealth is actually pretty easy, but we make it a lot more difficult than we think we should make it. We always, and the reason is we look for, these ways to sort of hack and, try to get to wealth as quick as possible and all those kind of things. But really, for the vast majority of the people, it's actually super easy and it's pretty tried and true. Very simple. Just take a percentage of your wealth. So something like 15% is a good estimate. If you sort of follow the whole Dave Ramsey plan, you take 15% and you invest that in, and this is where I tend to differ a little bit from what the sort of suggestions that you might hear about is just putting it in index funds. You could sort of follow what he suggests or what other people suggest and invest it in mutual funds. So for me, it's easier to invest in mutual funds because that's what my work provides. It's that's a sort of standard thing of doing doing things. But that's all you really have to do, and the problem is that we make it really difficult. From the academic side, I'm always reading about the sort of challenges of this kind of stuff, and if you're doing it yourself, it is challenging, right? You have to sort of figure out. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, I'm Professor Dave Massack. I'm Associate Professor of Innovation Strategy and Entrepreneurship, and I created this whole Reciprocity Project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people to help me out that I want to pay the favor forward to help you out. So if you're doing it yourself, there is a lot of challenges, but it's really just, figuring out who the audience or who your customers are. And then once you finally figure out who they are and what they're about, then, having a conversation with them and trying to solve their problems that they have. And then figuring out from there, the sort of subsequent step is figuring out what is the appropriate amount that you should charge for those problems, or which is called the appropriation debate or appropriation ideas. How much you should appropriate of the wealth, right? And in general, a good thing to think about is that you don't want to, the least amount that you can appropriate, the least amount that you need is actually the best. And so, ideally the best would be to give everything away for free, because then you're going to grow your audience, you're going to grow your impact, but then you sort of have to figure out, okay, we need some resources, we need some money to sort of grow this thing in different areas, right, to make sure it all doesn't fall apart and it's sustainable. So, in general, it's pretty easy to do these things, and yet, I can have innumerable conversations with different people. And, almost everybody is going to have this sort of view that they can sort of beat the market, right? That there is this sort of best possible way. And I think part of it has to do with, in terms of what is taught in, business education, but also the sort of belief, falsehood that we think that we're somehow superior, we're somehow better, individuals are somehow better, instead of just simply saying, hey, you know what, why not just match the market? Or if you can get close to the market, you're actually doing pretty good, right? Like if you have, if you're meeting the market, and the market, if you didn't realize this, is actually pretty spectacular, because you're actually taking the best possible companies around the world and putting them in a public exchange. That's really what happens. And so those ones, and then you take the best of the best of those ones, and you're doing pretty spectacular. And we're always thinking about, okay, how can we beat the market? What's the best way to make money? All that kind of stuff. And most of it's hocus pocus. In fact, I would say 99% of it's hocus pocus. And if you were to have this, if you had a magazine like any of these business magazines like Fortune or Fast Money, whatever, I'm not knocking them. And by the way, that they're interesting, and I do read those things. Or HBR, Harvard Business Review, and stuff. I do read them. They're interesting, right? You know, it would be really spectacularly boring just to simply say, hey, you know, invest your money broadly, and do it slowly over a long haul. That's boring, and that's not necessarily all that exciting. But in reality, nobody does it. It takes a lot of work to do it because it's slow, it's tedious, it's boring, and it's there's no quick wins. You can't tell that story. You can't tell that sort of amazing story that, hey, I invested in this thing and everything sort of took off and it became this sort of, you know, romantic notion of what it means to invest, to do these things, right? So that's one angle, right? Is to sort of just do broad investing, and I think most people should do that. I think that is like the best possible course of action. But if you're going to do it yourself, you know, that's what the whole reciprocity project is actually, is me figuring out, okay, how can I do this? But, you know, getting to the point, and you don't know this, but getting to the point where you're actually matching the market and you're getting to the returns of the market is really actually pretty hard. And you have to do a lot to get to that point where you're actually getting returns of the market. And there's lots of work involved. So, you know, you might try to, and you know, I went through some of it, is figuring out the audience and, you know, solving problems for them and all those things. That's not clear and it's not easy. And there's no sort of straightforward thing, but in reality, it's actually pretty sort of simple, right? If you think about it, it's just problem-solving activity. Problem is, we don't know what people like. We don't know how long, if we figure out what they like, how long that's going to last. We don't know, you know, whether somebody is going to come in and, you know, do something that's a little better than what you're doing. There's like so many different variables, right? But we simply have to just try to do your best at the end of the day. So what I'm getting at is, don't get fancy. It really is going to burn you over and over and over again if you try to get fancy. The best thing is to be simple, be boring, and, you know, just plug along and just repeatedly plug along, day in and day out. Don't worry about it, right? Eventually it's going to get to the point where you'll figure it out, right? If you are doing it sort of broad-based investing like I was talking about, you're going to do okay. You're going to do pretty spectacular, in fact. But it takes an awful long time, and people are going to laugh at you and all that kind of stuff, right? Like all that sort of basic story. But it takes a lot of work, and you're going to take a significant portion of your money right now and dump it into something that has long-term value, and you're going to freak out when that happens, right? So you're going to take, say you're making $50,000 right now, you're going to take 15% of that. So what is 15%? Doing math in my head, roughly, you know, $10,000 of that, a little less, and well, let's say, you know, let's say it's $7,500 of that, and which is a lot of money, right? Like that is a lot of money, and dumping that into a long-term investment, and you do that day in, day out. And long-term investment is, you know, generally some sort of index fund or mutual funds or whatever. Like really good mutual funds have been around forever. You know, you do that day in and day out. It's not exciting. You're not going to have any sort of physical entity that you can say, hey, look what I made, or look what I did, or all those kind of things. You'll just have to, the only thing you can do is give a nod or a wink to somebody if they're saying, hey, how are you doing with that? But you can't do that nod or wink until it's 25 years out, right? You have to have that sort of confidence of it. But really, there's not a lot to it, and there's not sort of magic in any sort of way, and people are going to argue with all these kind of things, but man, it's pretty spectacularly boring to sort of say these things. You can, again, coming back to the analogy of, you know, all of these business magazines, you could probably write most of this stuff on a page. That would be it, and that would be the entire thing. You wouldn't have a story to tell. There would be no hero. involved. But then for the most part, that's the best that we could do. There might be other things that are out there, and people are going to argue with this, but it's pretty sound advice, and it's pretty boring. But boring is good. That's what I've learned time and time again. Boring is good. Boring means that things are going as planned, and that is good. All right, so with that, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.